Bibliophiles of the internet, we are somehow rapidly approaching the end of the year, and in the spirit of looking ahead, I wanted to chat about some of my most anticipated 2025 releases. Listen, I'm trying to put on a smile, but I am filming this the week of the presidential election here in the United States, and a lot of shit is really bad right now. It's not good. It's not great. Truthfully, it hasn't been for a while, and anyone who tells you otherwise is woefully out of touch with reality. But now things are decidedly worse. So I just need to remind myself that there are, in fact, good people out there making good art that we can look forward to and learn from and enjoy, even when the future feels so bleak. And yes, it is wild to be talking about 2025 book releases. I'm still behind on new releases going back like 2, 3, 4 years. So do I have any business setting my eyes on any more books coming out in the near future? No, I do not. Am I here to add to all of our never-ending TBRs anyways? Absolutely yes. I follow the publishing industry very closely online. I see a lot of industry news, book deal announcements, and cover reveals on Instagram especially. So I have a saved folder on Instagram just full of unpublished and soon-to-be published books. So we're going to go through that and see what we find. By the way, this is just organized in the order I saved the announcements, not necessarily in order of when they'll be published. So let's just start with The Buffalo Hunter Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. This comes out from Saga Press on March 18th. This is a historical horror story set in 1912 and told in the style of diary entries and interview transcriptions written by a Lutheran priest who is retracing the life of a vampire who haunts the fields of the Blackfeet Reservation searching for justice. We don't know too much about the story beyond that. It's also in part about discovering a massacre and a gruesome timeline of events connecting the mass killings of Blackfeet on this same reservation. It's described as an Indian revenge story, which sounds absolutely badass, and in the trustworthy hands of Stephen Graham Jones, I already know it's going to be great. On a very different note, for very different reasons, I was also really excited to hear about Coffee Shop in Another Universe by C.B. Lee, which comes out on June 10th from Fievel and Friends. This is a blend of queer contemporary romance and cozy fantasy. It's about this geeky, overachieving girl named Brenda whose internet goes out right before she's going to submit a really important scholarship application, and somehow she ends up walking into a family-owned coffee shop that she's never seen before. Little does she know she's actually stumbled into a fantasy world, and there she meets Kat, who has been prophesized to be the chosen one, and these two fall for each other despite the fact that they're literally from two different universes. I love CB Lee. It's been a second since they've published something, but I always love diving into their queer stories. I was a big fan of their indie superhero series back in the day, and I also really enjoyed their installment in the Remix Classic series, so it's great to see them back and tackling a story in a new genre that just sounds really fun. Keeping in theme with the nerdy queer romances, let's talk about Roll for Love by MK England, which comes out from Running Press Kids on April 8th. This is for all the queer D&D gamers out there. It's a sapphic second chance romance about Harper, whose family just moved across the country to a small farming town in Virginia. So not only is she leaving all her friends behind, but she'll have to find a new D&D group to play with as well. She then runs into Ollie, her neighbor, childhood friend, and first crush, who plans to spend the summer gardening, hanging out with her best friends, and coincidentally trying D&D for the first time. As they begin playing together, their D&D characters start developing feelings for each other, which may or may not translate to what the players are feeling in real life. Again, I love MK England. You will always find me recommending The Disasters and Spellhacker any chance I get. They're another author who doesn't necessarily publish a new book every single year, so I was excited to see this new announcement, and I know they're so good at writing queer, nerdy romance that I can't wait to see what they're going to do with this blend of fantasy and real life. Speaking of queer, albeit in a very different flavor, I was also excited to see the announcement for Cassandra Khaw's upcoming release, The Library at Hellbore, which comes out from Tor Nightfire on July 22nd. This is a blend of queer horror and dark academia. It's set in the Hellbore Technical Institute for the Gifted, which is the premier academy for Antichrists and Ragnaroks, aka World Eaters and Apocalypse Makers. Our main character, Alessa Lee, is kidnapped and forcibly enrolled in the institute, where she quickly learns that there's much more than meets the eye, especially when graduation comes around and the faculty go on a rampage, feasting on Alessa's class. She and a very small group of classmates are the only ones to survive the carnage, but now they're trapped in the library and forced to offer a human sacrifice every single night, or else the faculty will break in and kill everyone. I am so down for this. It sounds absolutely wild. I haven't read as much from Cassandra Khaw as I would like to, but I know they like to play in the horror genre, and they haven't done a take on dark academia before, so I'm really excited to see what they do with this. This next book is, for real, one of my most highly anticipated 2025 releases, and that is The Love Club by Leo Min, which comes out from Flatiron Books on August 5th. Leo Min is the author of Beating Heart Baby, one of the best contemporary coming-of-age stories on the planet, and this is their sophomore release about a group of estranged high schoolers who are pulled into a video game to investigate the disappearance of one of their friends. It's about this group of 4 close friends who use the initials of their first names to nickname themselves the Love Club, but they end up moving away from each other and leaving O alone with her grief and confusion. And even when Liberty and Vera return for their senior year of high school, they can't quite find a way to mend their broken friendship. However, they're drawn to their old clubhouse, where they discover a console with a game loaded for them to play, created by none other than their friend Elle, who has actually gone missing. And by playing this game coded with their lived experiences and shared history, they might just find out what happened to Elle and possibly how to get them back. I cannot wait for this one. I love that it has a slight fantasy sci-fi lean to it. The concept of being sucked into a video game programmed for you to literally advance through your past experiences is just really cool. And even though this is so wildly different from Beating Heart Baby, you can just tell that Leo Min's fingerprints for melancholic beauty and nostalgia are all over this. Going back to horror, I also cannot wait to read Bochica by Carlina Flores Cerciero, which comes out from Primero Sueño Press on May 13th. This is a gothic horror story inspired by a real-life Latin American haunted mansion. It's set in 1923 Colombia, where an opulent mansion known as La Casona was once home to Antonia and her family, and they lived there for a time despite the nightmares and encounters with the house's malevolent spirits. But when Antonia's mother takes a deadly fall, her father is consumed by grief and attempts to burn down the house, with Antonia still inside. Many years later, Antonia is drawn back to her childhood home, which has now been converted into a luxurious hotel. And as she finally confronts the estate and her fragmented memories, she begins to question the true nature of her mother's death. This is everything I'm all about. I love gothic horror stories, I love the excavation of family secrets, I love stories set in Latin America that examine horror and generational trauma, so I truly cannot wait for this debut. Dramatically pivoting genres once again, we have to talk about Mason Deaver's debut adult romance, The Build-A-Boyfriend Project, which comes out from Avon Books in summer 2025. This is an adult romance about Eli, who is stuck working as an assistant for an online magazine when he should be writing articles for that magazine instead, and he's also forced to work alongside his ex. But then his roommates push him to finally start dating again, which is how he runs into Peter, who is both unbelievably handsome and unbelievably awkward. So their first date is quite simply disastrous. And when Eli's boss overhears Eli telling his coworkers about their catastrophic evening, he suggests that Eli takes Peter on even more dates, teaching him how to be a better boyfriend so that he can write an article about this experiment. But while Eli agrees, he's actually just pretending to write the article and secretly interviewing Peter about growing up queer in the South and what it's like to date as a queer adult, spinning that into a new article that will hopefully get him the promotion he deserves, while he and Peter definitely do not fall for each other in the process. Mason Deaver, as always, gives the people what they need and what they want. When I see an adult romance with a trans main character and a fake dating scenario, I honestly do not need to know anything else. I will definitely read it. Staying in the adult romance realm for the moment, I was also very excited to see the cover for Danica Nava's next romance, Love is a War Song, which comes out from Berkeley Romance on July 22nd. This is about a Muskogee pop star named Avery Fox, who recently was featured on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine wearing a feather war bonnet, which was supposed to symbolize her success as a Native American singer, but her cover caused a huge controversy, and now she decides to lie low and escape to her grandmother's ranch. Living on the res and working the ranch is completely new for Avery, and it also puts her in the path of a cowboy named Lucas, who's showing her the ropes even though he resents everything she stands for and wants nothing more than to keep to himself. They come to a tenuous truce when Avery promises to help raise funds for the ranch, with Lucas showing her what it really means to be Indian and meaningfully engage with her culture in exchange. I really enjoyed Danica's debut, The Truth According to Ember, and if the couple in this story is even half as endearing as Ember and Danawa, then this romance is going to be fantastic. Danica's also given us some behind-the-scenes info about the pop music aspects of the story, even going so far as to actually write and produce an original song for the book, which I just just think is really cool. I love when authors are that engaged and that passionate about their stories. And going from adult romance back to YA romance, I also cannot wait for Cynthia So's next release, This Feast of a Life, which comes out from Little Tiger Books and ostensibly then Harper Teen for those of us in the States in January 2025. This is a queer YA romance about Auden, who is still trying to figure out who they are. They're still getting used to using their chosen name, and they also want to start a food blog where they can share family recipes and stories. Making their blog actually brings them to Valerie, who lost her mom about a year ago, and one of her mom's greatest loves was cooking. Ever since her passing, Valerie and her father have been drifting apart from each other, and when Valerie discovers Auden's blog, she thinks that she may have found the perfect thing to bring them back together again. First of all, Cynthia So wrote one of my favorite books, If You Still Recognize Me. It is an extraordinary coming-of-age story with so much heart and so much thoughtfulness. I have been waiting so long for Cynthia to write something new, and this new book just sounds wonderful. I love stories about cooking, but especially those that touch on the emotional, the cultural, and the personal parts of cooking and what it means to share food with the people we love. And it just seems like this is blending together all the best parts of those ideas. To close things out, I'm going to talk about a couple of nonfiction titles and then some recently announced book deals as well. So first up is One Day Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This by Omar El Akkad, which comes out from Knopf on February 25th. This is political nonfiction described as a breakup letter to the West. The author is an Egyptian-born writer and journalist who is using this book as an opportunity to grapple with the deep fracture that Black, Brown, and Indigenous Americans have experienced in the United States, especially when clinging to dominant Western ideals. It's about how this country does not live up to the values it espouses and what it really means to live in a world run by a small group of Western and European countries. What are the consequences of that and what can we expect? I'm really curious to see what this book holds. I think it's an incredibly relevant and important treatise on the intellectual disconnect that so many US citizens have in regards to our undue global power, our privilege, and our inability to truly understand the history that we're creating and playing a part in. In the simplest terms, this book sounds like a reckoning, and I think we need that. Somewhat related, I was also incredibly excited to see a new book announcement from Palestinian writer Mohammed El-Kurd, whose next book is called Perfect Victims and the Politics of Appeal, which is coming out from Haymarket Books on February 11th. This is another piece of political nonfiction that goes in depth on how the concept of Palestinian liberation is a microcosm of the world. Depending on how we approach Palestinian liberation reveals so much about how we see each other, how we see the rest of the world, and countless other interwoven and interconnected issues. It's not only about how we're all witnessing and processing genocide in real time on our screens and in closer ways than we ever have before, but it's also about how Palestinian solidarity hinges on us recognizing that the existence and liberation of Palestine is, in and of itself, a universal cause. Mohammed El-Kurd is a phenomenal writer. He wrote an incredible poetry collection called Rifka, which I highly recommend. His command of language and the way he uses language to cut through the noise and force the reader to radically reconceptualize the concepts he's touching on is absolutely incredible. I cannot wait to see what he's going to do with this new book that has even more content and even more space. Moving on to recently announced book deals or book details, there's no way I could make this video without talking about The Bewitching by Silvia Moreno Garcia, which comes out from Del Rey on July 15th. This is a mixture of historical fantasy and horror. It's a multi-generational saga about witchcraft and dangerous magic. The main character is Minerva, a graduate student focused on the history of horror literature, and she gets caught up researching the life of Beatrice Tremblay, an obscure author of horrific tales. As she assembles her thesis, Minerva uncovers information revealing that Tremblay's most famous novel, The Vanishing, was inspired by true events that took place during the Great Depression, and that Tremblay not only studied at the same university Minerva is now attending, but she also became obsessed with her roommate, who eventually disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The more Minerva continues to research this manuscript, she begins to suspect that the malicious force that once stalked Tremblay and the missing girl might still be walking the halls of the campus. I feel like I don't really need to say anything else. If Sylvia writes it, I will read it, and I'm so stoked that she's returning to the horror space. Of her most recent releases, Silver Nitrate did have some horror elements to it, but I would say it was was more of a paranormal or supernatural sort, this seems more in the vein of Mexican Gothic, which was haunting and dread-inducing, and I just can't wait to see what Sylvia does with this premise. In somewhat of the same vein, I'm also incredibly excited that we're finally getting another book from Isabel Cañas. It's called The Possession of Alva Diaz, and it's coming out from Berkeley in summer 2025. This announcement is so new that we still don't even have an official listing for the book. Everything we know is in the deal announcement, so I'm just going to read it from there. It says, and I quote, "Set in 1765 Mexico after a plague outbreak, a young woman flees to the silver mining town where she was adopted, just as a demonic presence awakens, and the only person who can save her is a man she should not trust." Not to get ahead of myself, but this is going to be incredible. Isabel Cañas is a master of historical Mexican horror at this point. Again, her last book was more paranormal / creature feature, which was still really great, but I cannot tell you how excited I am to see her take on demons. It seems like there's another sort of forbidden romance as well, and we know how perfectly she executed that in The Hacienda. There's just so much about this new book to love, and I cannot wait to learn more. Lastly, and perhaps the most recent book announcement I have saved, is Defanged by H.E. Edgman, which comes out from File and Friends on September 23rd. This is going to be H.E. Edgman's second middle grade book. In case you missed it, about a month ago they released their middle grade debut, The Flicker, which is like an apocalyptic adventure story. This upcoming title is more speculative and paranormal, and it's about vampires. Specifically, it's about a 12-year-old vampire named Lux, and he lives in a world where vampires live alongside humans. But unfortunately, an anti-vampire group has developed a so-called cure for vampirism, and Lux isn't exactly thrilled about it or happy to see how excited everyone else seems. He has no desire to become human, and he decides to stage an epic escape and run away to a secret underground vampire city where he will have to decide whether he wants to return home or fight back for the right to be himself. You know I love H.E. Edgman. I've loved every one of their books that I've read so far, and I'm so excited that they're telling stories in the middle grade space. Like the graphic says, the vampirism in this story is kind of a metaphor for autism, but I'm sure it also works as a metaphor for the experience of being othered in more ways than one. And we could always use more urban fantasy middle grade adventure stories with vampire main characters. So those are just a handful of 2025 book releases that I've bookmarked on social media. There are so many more 2025 releases I could have talked about, but we'll just leave it there for now with the understanding that there is so much more to look forward to. If any of these are on your radar, let me know, or feel free to drop your own anticipated releases down below in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, educate yourself, be kind to yourself, take care of yourself and others, and I will catch you on the flip side of the page. Bye!